Hi, trend forecasting students. I hope you're all doing well. I'm coming to you today to talk about the final project. As you may recall from our initial correspondence when our course first went to completely online, the final project was one of the items that was most significantly edited. In its previous iteration, the final project was an exercise that asked you not only to work in teams, but for those teams to work together in some cases, and for individuals to go out into industry and to interact with industry professionals. So a lot of interpersonal interaction, as you can see. And so it became clear pretty quickly that that was not going to be safe, and it really wasn't going to be feasible in many cases. So a new final project was developed. That was rolled out for you upon return from our extended spring break. So at this point, I hope that you have had ample time to review the material with regard to the final project. So specifically, I hope that you have explored the final project module in our Canvas course site, that you have read the project guide, and that you have sifted through some of the resources available to you in the project module. So I thought what I would do today is connect with you a little bit to see how you're doing. I wanted to get a sense of how the project's going, where things are at, get your feedback, right? So I'm really looking forward to hearing how this is going. So please feel free to reach out and let me know. I would welcome the feedback, whether it's positive, negative, neutral. You're loving it, you're hating it, you're stuck at a standstill, whatever it might be. More specifically, if you do have a particular question or a particular concern, I would really like to hear from you so that we can troubleshoot well in advance of the deadline. Speaking of the deadline, we are less than 3 weeks out from it. So that's part of the reason for my video connection with you today. It is somewhat of a critical point, I think, in the project's development, in the sense that for many of you who got a head start, you're going to be starting to wind down your work. For some of you who maybe haven't gotten as deep as you'd like to, you're going to really start to ramp up because we've got, again, less than 3 weeks to finish this project. So I thought it would be a good time to connect with you on this, see how it's going, check in a little bit. I also am anticipating that as you start to wind it down and come close to submission, that there may be some last minute questions or some points that need a little bit of clarification before you cross all the T's and dot all the I's. So in anticipation of that, I thought what I would do is go through some of the details and maybe have the opportunity to answer some of those questions before they even arise. So I'm going to take a few minutes to go through the project with you in detail. And I'm going to start by visiting the project module in Canvas, okay? So we're going to spend most of our time in the project overview area, where you can find the project guide and overview. So we're going to take a look at that document. This document starts out with a little bit of context for the project and then gets into the specifics of what's required. The context of the project is essentially that we're living in unprecedented times, okay? There's a quote that opens the project that says that talks first about the difference between, that there is, in fact, something called a micro and a macro trend, something that I hope you know a little bit about now, having taken the class. That's something that we've talked about in class and that you've actually since read about since we've been learning remotely. And then goes on to say that macro trends may evolve as a result of global advancements in science and technology, or can appear abruptly in the wake of a seismic event, such as a war, financial, or social upheaval. So if a global pandemic isn't a seismic event, I don't know what is, right? So I think we would be remiss if we didn't take a moment to really think about that and incorporate that into our work and into thinking about where the fashion industry is going. So that's exactly what this project asks you to do, okay? So you will develop what we'll call the coronavirus edit, okay? So this is basically a multi-piece, multi-component editorial piece that will delve into the impact of coronavirus on fashion, okay? So let's get a little bit into each of those different pieces. So first is a written editorial, okay? So you will write a significant piece something that might feel like an op-ed, in a fashion magazine or on a fashion blog, on the impact of coronavirus on fashion. So you can prepare this piece in a journalistic style that conveys your own unique voice and tone. So it should absolutely let your character and personality shine through. For that reason, first person is totally acceptable here. This doesn't need to be formal business writing. And it should include personal observations and experiences. So that's not only allowed, it's encouraged, right? It will give your piece a realness to it, and it will also, I think, be relatable to a lot of people, because sharing experiences is, a critical way of communicating right now, where we can't communicate face-to-face in many instances. What you also need to do is to ground your piece in real research, in some cases data, and so where the personal observations and experiences will give your piece a certain character and a easy to read and an enjoyable tone, the research piece will give a certain dimension and legitimacy to your work that will be a nice juxtaposition between the opinion, right? So in order to do that, I'm asking you to reflect. So I've given you a number of questions to reflect on, kind of in this section of the document, okay? So I'm going to go through those quickly because you can certainly read those on your own. But I want you to think holistically, okay, across the board. Reflect deeply on how you think COVID-19 will impact fashion, its systems, ethos, industry, business, operations, but then the fashion itself, right? The style directions, the product, right? The look, the aesthetic. How will this situation impact all aspects of fashion? Okay. So then you will research, okay, how fashion has been impacted in the past when we have experienced major societal shifts because of a major global event or a national event or whatever the case may be. So even though this feels, again, to use the word seismic, pretty seismic, it's actually not the first time that a society or even the globe has undergone a pretty significant event that has shaped its course. So I want you to do some research on that and include that in your work here, right? Certainly you'll get some ideas. You'll be able to make comparisons and kind of contrast what happened in the past with what's happening now. So what will the major takeaways be of the current crisis on a post-COVID-19 world, or at least in a controlled COVID-19 world? How has it impacted you, right? How have you changed the way that you dress or the way that you shop for fashion, the way that you think about style and aesthetic, okay? So to get into the specifics of what is required of the written piece, we'll look at this section here, okay? So coronavirus impact on the fashion industry. The word industry is important here. I am not talking about fashion itself. I'm talking about the industry. So business, operations, new models, etc. Okay? Coronavirus impact on the direction of fashion. Here's where I'm talking about fashion specifically. So style, design concepts, looks, aesthetic, etc. I want to see evidence of true reflection, right? So I want to see that you took the time to really process what has and what is continuing to happen all around you. I want to see evidence of research. So get out there, virtually of course, and read and understand what has happened in the past when there's been a major shift or a major event, and what is happening now. There is a lot of information on both of those out there, so that you should be able to do that with relative ease. At a minimum, I'd like to see at least one reference to a historical example of fashion's response to a societal shift, event, or development, okay? A strong synthesis of these same observations, research, personal opinions, and experience to develop a compelling point of view. Anytime an editorial piece is developed, it is so important that there is a unique and strong perspective present. That's what compels someone to read the piece, and it's what keeps that person reading once they've started reading. So you need to figure out what that is for you and your piece. So Once you've done that, you will come up with two forecasted trend stories. So you've now, at this point, done a lot of reflection, a lot of researching, and a lot of writing. So now you're going to think about what does the coronavirus impact look like, right? So you're the forecaster here. You're going to develop two different trend themes influenced by COVID-19, okay? And then you're going to develop a little bit of creative direction around those two themes, okay? So you are going to show us what trend stories will emerge from the coronavirus outbreak. Each of the trend stories must include the following items. A concept board, right? So this will include aesthetic and thematic imagery that conveys what the trend concept is. Of course, a title for the concept, and then a season and category identifier. A color story with palette. So you'll include the same thematic title with color direction and inspiration, color swatches with appropriate names. Trend context. So this is where we get a little bit of a written explanation of what the trend is all about. This page or slide can also include imagery, but it should include a summary statement on the theme or concept of the trend story. So you'll describe it in words to support your visuals. So that needs to include a description of the trend direction, how the concept was formulated, its relationship to the current climate, and how it might man itself in product assortments and merchandising. So in other words, what products do you think could come out of this trend, okay? So you may opt to use some images there, but you should also understand that this is a written description, okay? So both imagery and verbiage is okay on that particular slide. So let's talk about the summary of this project. Deliverables: a written editorial and two forecasted trend stories. In general, the process that you should follow to get there is this. Reflect, research, synthesize reflections and research, develop your ideas, write your editorial piece. Then from there, you'll create your fashion forecast, which will include two trend stories. Edit all, finalize, and submit. So let's talk about the format and the specs of what these pieces should look like. You may prepare the editorial separate or together with the trend story materials. In other words, you may submit one consolidated piece, or multiple files. You should prepare your work in PowerPoint or PDF format and submit it on Canvas. And then you may link it to your blog or publish it in your ePortfolio if you choose. The written editorial piece should be 700 to 1,000 words. The trend stories should include a minimum of 3 pages, one each for the concept board, color story, and trend context. So that's for each of the trend stories, okay? So that would be 6 pages total, considering that 2 trend stories are part of this project. Okay, so that is the project overview. Hopefully that's relatively straightforward for you. I'm going to toggle back over to the final project module and show you a couple last minute things. A couple last few things. So project resources are here. Lots of different articles. These I found at the onset of this crisis, or maybe I shouldn't say the onset, but early on. So these are mostly going to be dated from March. So there's a lot more that's come out since then. So please do your own research. This is just a place to get started and to give you some ideas of places to look. There are some resources for asking questions, a Q&A form that can be answered by me or your fellow classmates. You can schedule a meeting with me. And then finally, you have the Dropbox for your work, and then an optional final project discussion. So this project, I think, is going to incite a lot of interesting thought, reflection, research, and final work. And I think it would be unfortunate if there was no place to share that with each other. I've given you up until the last moment of this semester to work on this because it is such an ever-evolving situation that we're living in. So I wanted you to have not only a lot of time to work on it, but also a lot of time to make observations about how things evolve from a day-to-day basis and a week-to-week basis. And so because it's due on the last day of the semester, I didn't want to carry it out in past the end of the semester with multiple discussions. But I did want to provide a place for you to share your work and discuss it if you are inclined. So there is a place for posting some work or posting some thoughts, and then